Okay, so welcome Zadie, Judd, and Gloria. And it looks like Toby just logged on. Yeah, there she is. And it looks like Marina just logged on as well. So welcome Toby and welcome Marina. Just a heads up on not this week. Let me look at my calendar really quickly. Not this week, not next week, but the following week. So in 2 weeks from now, instead of this year being on Thursday, November 10th, we will have it a day earlier on Wednesday the 9th. Have a wedding, as my grandfather is probably aware of. His granddaughter, my cousin, is getting married that night. So we won't be holding shiur that night, but we'll have it a day earlier.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. All right, Zadie, they wish you mazel tov.
Thank you. And mazel tov to you, cousin.
Indeed. Also, that night happens to be Kristallnacht. Rabbi Cohen is away, so he charged me with helping do PR for the community-wide Federation Kristallnacht awareness. So basically, what the Federation is asking is pretty straightforward: is that we just go to shul and learn and take a photo of it. So that shouldn't be such a tall order. I know many of us don't want to come out in the evening; it's difficult. If possible, I'll try to remind us, but on Wednesday, November 9th at 7 o'clock, if you're able to come in person for Gemara, please do let me know. If you want, I can even pick up refreshments if that makes it more palatable. So, okay, putting it on your radar. Anyway, we are up to Chav Gimel Amud Beis. That's 23b at the Mishnah toward the top of the page. And what we are basically going to be spending the evening discussing are what kind of things require a minyan. Okay, so offhand, what kind of things need a minyan, guys?
Kaddish.
Very good. Kaddish, Judd said. Kaddish requires
Baruch Hu.
Baruch Hu. So these are examples that we call Dvar Shek Kedusha.
The Suda. Yeah. Mitzvah Suda. No?
Sudas mitzvah. We're going to see there's a particular kind of Sudas mitzvah called Sudas Avra, which is the first meal that someone gets after a funeral. So we're going to see in the Mishnah, it talks about a bracha that's made at that Suda. So that is an example of a Sudas mitzvah that requires 10 men. Okay, we think of any other examples?
How about bris?
Okay, let's do one at a time. Just going in order on my screen. Gloria, Toby, and Frida.
How about a bris?
A bris, interesting. A bris actually doesn't require a minyan. Interestingly enough, now you would think it's such a significant mitzvah, such a special time, but
no, it has to be done. Has to be done whether there are 10 people there or not.
Yeah, I've been to a bris or two in someone's home, and there certainly wasn't a minyan present over there. But generally, Gloria, what you might be thinking is many times when there's a bris, it takes place right after Shacharis. So there's generally already a minyan present because they were there for davening. And then, it's always that question of, if I don't know the families, then I could slip out. If I sort of know the family and I'm already there for Shacharis, so I wouldn't have gone on my way to attend the bris, but now I'm there. It's too awkward for me to slip out. But then I need to catch. So that's what happens. Okay, Toby, you were giving us an example. What else needs a minyan? Pidyon ben. So interestingly, that doesn't require one either. Actually, similar to bris. But it's hard to recall because how often does a pidyon ben happen that we can really think about that?
But I mean, we skipped over the basic one, basically a minyan to daven if you want to say a kedusha, right?
Good. So that's along the lines of what Judd was saying about.
Yeah.
Right. So what we have is a broad category of what's called. You know what? If you need to write down key terms, write down this term. I'm going to probably use it a lot. It's called Dvar Shek Kedusha, which are special parts of prayer that have a heightened sanctity that could only be said with a minyan. So, it's even in the name, Kaddish, Kedusha. It's Baruch Hu. So, Kriyas Torah also, by the way, requires that. Oh, is that what you're going to say, Judd? Very good.
And the repetition of Shemona Esrei.
Very good. Chazaras Hashatz requires it because, after all, the whole purpose is because you have a minyan needs to be Yotze. Marina, were you going to say something?
I said that it's order reading, yeah.
All right, you get credit as well for that
What-
one. Oh, by the way,
What
one
about Kiddush
last,
Levana?
what, Erwin?
Kiddush Levana.
Kiddush Levana, actually, so ideally, you are correct, Erwin. Ideally, it would be said with a minyan. We do have Kaddish at the end of Kiddush Levana, which requires it. But in theory, if one is on their own, I would say it's not me'akev. So Erwin brings up a good point. There's certain things that might be more preferable to do with a minyan. Here's another example. Megillah reading, right?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say
Megillah
that.
reading. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
you said that, Phyllis? I'm sorry, I
I'm
didn't hear it.
just gonna say that.
All right, you
Stole my
have
thunder.
we acknowledge it. You get credit. So Megillah reading, we talked about how ideally many times it should be done with a minyan, but even if not, of course, b'di'evad, you could still be Yotzei reading on your own. Okay, so excellent. Many of you thought of ideas that are mentioned in the Mishnah, and then there's a number of obscure examples that also come up in the Mishnah. So why don't we take a look? Here we go. Well, the first one's already an obscure example. Ein porsin al shema. So, okay, what does it mean to be porsin al shema? If you look in Rashi, what happens is minyan. It's a question if it has to be a minyan or even an individual. Minyan habal lebeis haknesses. Just remember to mute ourselves. Thank you. Minyan habal lebeis haknesses la'achar shekarat tzibur es shema. So let's say a minyan gets the shul and the tzibur already said shema. So these people who are coming in late, there was a contradiction between the time that was on the printed bulletin, the time that was on the website, and the time that was on the daily virtual. So some people came in at 5:50, some people came in at 6 o'clock, and it threw everything off. So what do? Now, we don't want to take up too much time. Tirchet Tzibur is important to bear in mind, but we ask that people just stay in for another minute. That way, the people who came in late can say Kaddish, Baruch Hu, and the first bracha of Kriya Shema. Now, when I first read, I'm like, what's so special about the first bracha of Kriya Shema? So the first bracha of Kriya Shema in the morning has Kedusha in it. We say Kadosh, 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 Baruch Hashem in Komo. So that requires a minyan as well. There's a question if you're supposed to read it on your own, if you're saying it not with the tzibur. So I think we're basically makel on that in the end. But here's another example offhand. Slichos, saying Yud Gimel Midas Harachim, Hashem Hashem Korachim V'chadim. That requires a minyan as well. When we were saying Slichos at 6:05 in the morning during Aseres Yimei Tshuva, so there'd be times that we didn't have a minyan at the beginning. So we would actually have to skip over the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim. But ironically, the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim is one of the original core parts of Slichos. It is what Slichos is. So to skip over that and say the Piyutim is mixing up the Iker and the Tafel. Anyway, so that's being portion al Shema. It comes up in naturally Maseches Brachos as well. Ve'ein over lifnei ha-teva. So, and no one goes before the teva. Now, the teva here is not referring to the teva in Parshas Noach that we're about to read about. It's talking about davening, what we call davening for the Yamud. That means saying something like Chazaras Hashatz, for instance, which the Chazan's repetition requires 10. Veinos and Eskapehen. Also, Duchening, Birchas Kohanim requires. Oh, I think I just woke up my door. Veinos and Eskapehen, and we don't do Duchening. Don't worry, Mercy will handle. Ve'ein Korim B'Torah, Kriyas Torah also requires 10. Ve'ein Maftir B'Navi, likewise, we do not lay in Haftorah without 10. Now, here's the thing. It's actually very helpful because if you are on a trip, let's say, and you don't have a minyan, well, you don't need to worry about bringing a Torah with you because you're only chayiv in Kriyas Torah if there is a minyan present. If there's no minyan, there's no chiyuv of Kriyas Torah. So it's more that the existence of the minyan brings about the chiyuv of reading the Torah. I'm sure there's other ways to parse the lumdus, but that's the basic understanding. Okay, now we're going to talk about some things that apply to Hilchos Avelis, the laws of mourning. So what they would do is you look in Rashi. Rashi talks about the mamados. So if you ever notice, hopefully we don't see it so frequently, but at a funeral, basically while the coffin is being brought to the graveside by the pallbearers, you'll notice, I'm sure Rabbi Cohen does it as well. If you've been with I know a number of you have been in a funeral where I'm at, so we do what the stops, mamados. Now mamados were a little bit more fleshed out back then. It was actually moving. They stopped, they sat, they got back up, and people like would say things as they at every stop. Now we do it in a more of a perfunctory fashion, while saying Yosef B'Seiser, we stop, move again. So we might be familiar with this idea in its modern day manifestation. So that requires 10 as well, because what's it referring to? A postum yeshiva ma'amodos emotional slames. Okay, so the next thing, by the way, ve'in omen birchas avelim. So what is the blessing of avelim? The blessing, it's not talking about baruch dayan emes. You say baruch dayan emes, blessed be the true judge, without a minyan. So what is birchas avelim? The blessing of the mourners. So if we look, the Gemara will actually explain to us what it is, but I'll tell you, I'll spoil the surprise. It's when they have the Sudas Havra, when they have the initial meal, there's a special bracha made then that for some reason we don't make today. You can look at the Mefarshim on that. Tanchume Avelim, and then there's something called Tanchume Avelim. So Tanchume Avelim is at the end of the funeral service when we form a shura, we form rows. And then the mourners walk down and we say Hamaki Minachin. So that is also done in the presence of a minyan. Uberchas Chasanim, now shifting from the more somber life cycle to the happy events, Sheva brachos are only recited when there's a minyan. And when we have a mezumin, so you'll notice from your benchers that we only say Elokeinu, the Reich Elokeinu, when there is a minyan present. And the final halacha is something completely different, which has to do with erchen. When somebody wants to consecrate something to the temple and then wants to redeem it afterwards, you don't just have one guy come in and assess the worth, but Karkos, Tisha V'Kohen, you need 9 Yisraelim and 1 Kohen. And va'adam kayosven. Likewise, when redeeming a human being, you also need 9 Yisraelim and 1 Kohen. But we'll see. The Gemara is going to ask, what does it mean redeem a human being? Can you consecrate a human being to the base of Mikdash? So the Gemara will address that question. Phyllis, you got a question? No. Okay. Oh, Henry, welcome back. I'm glad the time zones have finally worked out. All right, good to have you back on.
Yeah, by next week, I'll be on the whole time. This was the last.
Okay, very exciting. Welcome back. So we are in Chaf Gimel and Beis on 23b.
Okay.
All
right.
Okay, so now the Gemara is going to ask me, Nahani Mili, where do we come up with this idea of 10 men? This seems very arbitrary. Where in the Torah to say you need 10 men for these things? So Amar Yevar Abba, Rav Yochanan, Amar Krab, Nikdash Ibesoch B'nei Yisrael, and I'll be sanctified amongst the sons of Israel. So that teaches us Kol Davar Sheva Kedusha Lo Yeh Pachos Me'asara. That anything that's our key term for tonight, a Davar Sheva Kedusha, something that's a special sanctified matter, requires at least 10 men. My mashma, where do you see in that pasuk that Besoch B'nei Yisrael amongst the Jewish people means amongst 10 members of the B'nai Yisrael? So here's how we figure it out. Here's some hermeneutics to follow. The Tayrachia, Asya, so we're going to have a Gezerah Shava now, okay? So remember, Gezerah Shava means when you have the same word or root of a word that appears in 2 different places in the Torah, it creates a wormhole that connects their dinim, connects their laws together. So Asya Toch, Ksiv Hacha V'Nikdashi Besoch B'nei Yisrael, Uksiv Hasam, and it's written elsewhere, Hivdalu Mitoch Ha'eda. You should remove yourself from the congregation, which is referring to Korach, where God wanted to, swallow up all those members of Korach and his people. So we see that the same word, toch, is mentioned in the context of sanctifying God and in the context of Korach. Now, okay, Shkayach, where do I see Korach, the number 10? There's much more than 10. So now there's a second step over here. And how do we know? So now we have the word Ada. So for us, yeah, Ada. Now we're going to have another Gezerah Shava. So it's like a double wormhole here. Desiv Hasam Ad Masayla Ada Hara Hazos. In the context of the spies, the Meraglim, it uses the term Ada, a congregation. What's a better word for Ada? Okay, whatever. Gather, like that's like more like a kahila. Okay, whatever. This congregation or whatever you want to call them. So there it's 10 also. There were 10. Remember, because Yeshua and Kalev, they didn't actually sin. So there's only 10 spies that were sinners. So Malon Asar Afkan Asar. So here's basically how it works. From the Meraglim, we have the word Ada there. We know there were 10 bad spies. And the same word Ada is used in the context of Korach. And then in the context of Korach, it used the word Toch, which is used in the context of sanctifying God. So we take the number 10, move it over to Korach, and then using another Gezerah Shava, move it over to the pasuk about sanctifying God. So we determined from there that we only sanctify God with Devar Sheva Kedusha when there is an Ada. How much is an Ada? Well, we see that just as 10 Meraglim were sufficient to be an Ada for committing a treacherous sin, so Achas Kama 10 men will suffice in order to sanctify God as an Ada. So there you have it. That is the source for requiring 10 men for a minyan. If anyone ever asks you, you can point to this Gemara right over here. All right. Any questions?
Wasn't there also dealing with Avram when he was talking about how many tzaddikim will be found, and he stopped at 10? I thought that was one of the other explanations for 10.
Right, because in Sodom, he stops at 10.
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't, right. Unless it's Gemara not thinking of, I don't think that's the source for minyan. But certainly.
I think Rashi may comment on that. I could be wrong, but I thought he did.
Who does?
Rashi.
Rashi does. Anyone have a chumash on them?
I'll take a look at the answer.
Henry's pulling out a chumash, I see. You'll take a look? Okay. I may be forgetting that. The Rashi says there, this is the source for a minyan. All right, I gotta read you my
I always thought too.
What?
I always thought that too.
Yeah, I mean, when you read, you're like, oh, 10, a minyan. But from a halachic standpoint, I don't think that's the makor unless it's another makor, because that would have just been like a much easier example to point to. Okay, so someone will tell me what Rashi on there says if that's indeed.
No, the Rashi there it talks about comparing it to the Dor Hamabul. That if you had Noach and his sons and his wife and so on were I think 8, and Hashem, he still didn't save the whole world for those 8. And then somehow Rashi gets to 9 and then 10, but he's comparing it to Noach, not with the minyan.
Right. I'm sure you'll find some, whether it's a Rishon or at least an Achron who makes that observation as well.
Sure.
But from a halachic standpoint, at very least, this is the source right here. Okay, so going further in the Gemara, ve'ein osin mamad umosha pachos me'asara. So we're talking about again the stops, the mamados at a funeral. Kevan devay lemeimar amdu yakarim amudu shavu yakarim shavu batzer me'asara lav orach ara. You ever hear this phrase? And I don't know a lot of Yiddish, but this is one I know. Something's pasnish. Means like, yeah, it's not appropriate. Like, come on. So basically, this is an interesting example. You see, what the Mishnah did was it grouped all sorts of things together that require 10. But the thing is that some things formalistically, halachically, strictly require 10 for a minyan. You're not allowed to say Dvarim Sheva Kedusha without a minyan. And then there are things that got put in the same Mishnah, but really deserve to be in a different category, such as the Mamados. Why is it that the Mamados require 10? It's not so much that the Mamados require 10, it's that they say to them, rise, Yakarim, rise, and sit, Yakarim, sit. Yakarim is Yakar, precious ones, or however they want to translate it in the art scroll. So what's it mean? And so why do you need 10? You need 10 to say Yikarim. Why? Look at Rashi. Rashi says, it's not the right thing to impose on the guy who's officiating. Because if you use your nicest title for only a few people, what kind of special titles are you going to use when there's even more people around? It seems a little bit odd to me, but the point being is that you don't actually need a minyan to do the mamados. It's just that if you're going to be using start pulling out fancy titles, we're not going to start imposing. It's like imagine, I have a minyan, like the 7 a.m. minyan. So there's like 11 and a half men over there. We just make it by the skin of our teeth most times, right? So for a minyan like that, it's a smaller amount of people. So I don't need to go out there and do all these fancy things like we now honor, who here's a 7 a.m. attendee. I don't know. We now honor, Mark Waxel with doing this thing. Why? Because it's like a small minyan. You don't need all the formalities. And in the 9 a.m. sanctuary, we do all the formalities because there's a big crowd that's there, right? Everyone's inside in attendance in the sanctuary. So a similar idea over here that when there's like a smaller crowd, it's you're not going to start pulling out all the different pomp and circumstance. You're not going to start making a show out of it because if you do it for them, then what are you going to do when you get the bigger crowd? Okay, that's lavor achara, because it's it's an imposition on the guy officiating to have to do all those, to put on a whole show just for a few people. But if the 7 a.m. really desires it, I could come in and I could do all that stuff for you guys. Okay. All right, Toby, at 8 a.m. we'll do that? Yeah, you think they'll enjoy? Okay.
Oh, try it. Try it.
And don't try it.
All right. So we just said that. So what are these blessings of the mourners, blessings of the chasanim? So blessings of the chasanim, of the grooms, we know what that is. That's called Sheva Brachos. But my birchas avelim, what is this blessing of the avelim? Birchas rechava. This is the blessing that they make out in the street, in the rechov. Damar Rabbi Yitzchak Rabbi Yochanan, birchas avelim ba'asara. When one recites the blessing on the avelim, he requires 10. However, the avelim themselves, the mourners themselves, are not included in the minyan. However, the chassan himself, the groom himself, could be included in the minyan for reciting Sheva Brachos. Now, what is this birchas avelim, this blessing of the mourners? So take a look at Rashi, and Rashi actually tells us that it's two separate brachos. Rashi dibur hamaskil ein avelim min haminyan. You look at Rashi, just slightly above where it is in the Gemara. One bracha is actually said for those who came to pay a shiva call. So that's a kind of a blessing for the people who came, that God should give them reward for supporting the family in this difficult time. And then a separate bracha is recited vis-a-vis the mourners, that God should give you consolation. So there's basically a necessity to group the avelim separately, and those who are coming to pay a shiva kol in one place, because they each have distinct brachos. Therefore, avelim are not included in the minyan that is required. All right, and then just finishing back to the Gemara, finishing up that piece. Birchas chasanim ba'asar b'chasanim minyan. So the birchas chasanim, the groom is included in the Sheva Brachos. End of that piece. All right. Moving forward, the aim is zamnin al hamazon b'shem pachos me'asara. So as we learned, that we only say nevarich Elokeinu when there is a minyan. Why? We're going to see a concept come back again. Because if we are going to start invoking and saying Elokeinu, the name, and we're going to invoke the name of God, and just like a few people hanging around, it's not bakavadik when you have a proper gathering and there's at least 10 that are gathered, so then it's respectable to invoke God's name. This might philosophically build off a similar principle, Barov Mahadras Melech, that the more people gathered in general, the more glory that's given to God. The flip side of the coin is that when there's only a few people that show up, it can be a disgrace. I don't know if disgrace is the right word, but it's a little bit underwhelming. It's all, it's more embarrassing. So it's lav orachara, it's pasnish. You're not going to invoke God's name when there is not a minyan present. Interesting halacha, by the way, because women actually can make a zimun. In fact, one might say that when there's not a zimun of men present, the women, and there's 2 men and 3 women. I've been at, Merce and I, we've had a meal like that once or twice. So then the women actually should go ahead and make the zimun, and the men should answer in that case. However, let's say there's 10 women, they would not answer Lelokenu because it requires an actual minyan. That's the general assumption. But it's interesting because if you assume Lelokenu is the Dvarim Sheba Kedusha, it should require 10 men. But if it's just a matter of being a lav or achara, which the Gemara seems to be saying, that it's just you need at least 10, you need a critical mass. So it's respectable to say it. One might argue, why can't 10 women say Lelokenu then, if 10 women are present? So that requires further analysis. Okay, moving forward. So as we learned, one can consecrate things and donate them to the temple. The thing is, if the temple wants to now sell it for proceeds or he wants to redeem it, so then we have to assess the worth. So where do we get this? Where do we get this idea that there needs to be 9 Yisraelim and then at least one, or there has to be one Kohen that's part of this cohort of people who are assessing it? Amar Shmuel, Asar Kohanim, Ksuvim Beparsha. So we're going to learn a very important hermeneutical principle from the good old Rabbi Yishmael's, right? So Rabbi Yishmael isn't just in davening so we can add in a Kaddish to Rabbanan, but it's there also to teach us important principles on how to interpret our Torah. So Asara Kohanim Ksuvim Beparsha. In this general topic in the Torah, the word Kohen is mentioned 10 times. Chad Legufe, it's mentioned once to tell us that at least one of those 10 men needs to be a Kohen. Ve'ira chavi mir acher miat, ve'mir acher miat ele rabos tish Yisraelim v'chad Kohen. So the principle of mir acher miat, an exclusion after an exclusion. So when the Torah tells us we need a Kohen, that's exclusive language. A Kohen to the exclusion of a Levi or a Yisrael. So the thing is, once you have a mir acher miat, you have an exclusion after an exclusion. For some reason, this is our tradition, that if an exclusion follows an exclusion, the second exclusion is actually not supposed to be interpreted as an exclusion, but rather it's supposed to be inclusive. What does that mean? So it means the second time Kohen is mentioned, it's actually to include a Yisrael instead, counterintuitively. And then every subsequent time Kohen is mentioned, it's also to include a Yisrael. So the first time it says Kohen, it's actually just to tell us a Kohen. And then the next 9 times, it's a miat acher miat, an exclusion after exclusion, which means actually don't be exclusive, right? That's the trend these days. Be inclusive and have 9 Yisraelim instead of additional 9 Kohanim. However, the Gemara asks, however, we may ask, if we follow the sequence of miat acher miat, the third time Kohen is mentioned would actually restart the cycle. So the third time Kohen's mentioned, it should actually be inclusive language. And then the fourth time, it's exclusive again, and then you do the whole miat acher miat all over again. So it should really come out to be 5 Kohanim and 5 Yisraelim. To which the Gemara responds, Taka, it's a kasha. I don't know. It's difficult. So actually, there's something important about that language about kasha that I wanted to point out. I saw in the Heilige Mesifta footnotes. I'll share with you. I don't know if they put it in the art scroll ones about the language of kasha. There it is.
No. Mhm.
Yeah. So here,
Not here.
what was that?
It's
Oh, no,
not
okay,
in this
so I'll
commentary.
tell you what the Heilige Mesifta footnote says, which seems to be based off the Rashbam in Bava Basra. B'chol makom shamur b'gemara kasha lo batu dvar shel mishe hikshu alav el sheba'osa shalom atzu teretz kushizu. Sometimes the Gemara will end off with the language of tiyufta. Tiyufta means, you're right, I don't have a good answer to this question, therefore ignore my assertion, everything falls apart. Kasha means that we are not repudiating, we're not rejecting the assertion of the Gemara. We're just saying that we have a tradition for this. We don't currently have a good explanation, a good elucidation of the tradition. So we're going to leave it as a kasha for the time being, but the matter is, it's not case closed. So someone will hopefully come one day and explain it, but that's different from the language you'll often see in the Gemara, which ends off with the language of tiyufta. When it's tiyufta, that means case closed. We don't have a good answer. Forget everything we just said. Kasha means we still accept this despite the difficulty that was presented. So anyway, just important to know that obviously the Torah is on a higher madrega, but even in Talmudic parlance, we have to be careful to read and understand the distinction between synonyms. That two words that may translate the same can actually convey two different things. So that's why I'm always, got to throw out those key terms.
How does teku integrate in that logic?
Interesting. So teku is, we don't actually know either way. So unlike tiyufta, which is we reject it, kasha is we accept it, we don't know the reason. Teku is we actually don't know either way. So we just, if there's money and we don't know if it belongs to Reuven or Shimon, and we end up saying teku, we based and holds on to that money until Eliyahu Navi comes and paskins. So that would be what a teku is. So yeah, thank you for bringing that in, Joe, because that's also an ending we'll see sometimes in the Gemara. Did I answer it, or?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Final part of this Gemara. Va'adam kayotzi behead. So Adam Mikadosh, can I consecrate someone to the Beis HaMikdash? Interestingly, you actually see with in Sefer Shmuel, Chana actually consecrates her son Shmuel to the temple service. But what we mean is you can't just donate a human being to the Beis HaMikdash. So a guy says, whatever my financial worth is, then I'm going to pay that much to the Beis HaMikdash. The Tanya Homer Dmei Alai Shamino So Ke'eved VeEved Iskish Karkos Tirsiv Mistachal V'Masul V'Nechem V'Acharechim L'Rishus Achuzah. So someone who wants to donate himself, not literally himself, but his worth to the Beis HaMikdash. How do we determine a person's worth? So we're not like, this isn't like some deep, we're gonna look into your soul and see. It basically means that if we're taking the slave market, we'd see how much someone would pay for you. We see how much your stocks are. So, how much would someone pay for a slave in a slave market? So, we have to adjust for inflation. We have to figure out if the Feds are rising interest rates. Okay, so that's how we basically figure that out. And now, where do we get this from? How do we know that we have to assess him with 9 men who are Yisraelim and 1 that's a Kohen? So we have a hekesh that connects the topic of avadim, of servants, with the topic of land ownership. Same way you need 9 Yisraelim plus 1 Kohen for assessing land, you need 9 Yisraelim and 1 Kohen for assessing human worth as well. And that brings us to the end of this Gemara. I have one piece from Cheshukei Chem I want to share, but why don't we just quickly learn the next Mishnah and get onto the top of Chaf Dalet and Aleph, and then I'll share an idea from Rav Zilberstein, and then we'll call it a night, okay? Sound like a good plan? All right. Next Mishnah, Hakori B'Torah Yivchos B'Shlosh Psukim. This is a halacha that we've familiarized ourselves with in previous shirim, that an aliyah in the Torah cannot be less than 3 psukim. That's the minimum. When reading from the Torah, so they would have a meturgaman back then, as we've learned, a guy who basically they didn't have the art scroll stone chumash, which actually, on the one hand, that makes life easier because you don't need to always announce all the pages, but it means that no one knew what the guy was reading. So instead of 2 seconds to announce the page, they had a guy who would translate it pasuk by pasuk, which took much longer, as we've seen in the past. So for the Torah, because the Torah is the word of God, it requires extra precision. Therefore, after every pasuk, the guy needs to translate it. Ubanavi Shlosha, however, when reading the Haftorah and Navi, it's okay if you go 3 psukim and then pause for the guy to summarize and translate the previous 3 psukim, because Navi doesn't need as much precision as the Torah does. Now let's say the next 3 psukim are each separate ideas. You'll see that like in Parshas Ki Seitzeh. You'll have like many times, in succession, each pasuk is its own separate mitzvah. So then, this is talking about in the context of Nevuah though. So then you would have to actually read one, translate one, translate one, translate. Finally, Midalg Navi, Midalg Torah, the Kamahu Midalg, Akdei Shlo Yifsuk HaMatorah Kaman. So finally, you'll see this many times with Haftorahs. We want to end off, let's say, on a happier note. So we'll take a Haftorah we'll take something else later on in the Navi, and we'll append it to the end of the Haftorah, so we end off in higher spirits. So that can be done, but the question is, how far can you skip? Because back then, again, you'll see today, Judd, as you pointed out in the past, that people will have scrolls of Sifrei Nevuah for the purpose of the Haftorah. Back then, they didn't have that nice red book with the huge text with the Haftorah in there. Everything was on scrolls back then. So you could just put a bookmark, and you didn't have like a page that actually takes the psuk and then puts it in there, and the art scroll book, which puts it all in order for you. So back then, if you wanted to append extra psukim to the Haftorah that were not part of it, you would need to actually roll the scroll to those psukim. So the question is, how much can you skip? You could only skip as long as the guy is still translating. If the translator, right, so translator needs to translate 3 psukim. If all it does is takes you within that time to roll to append additional psukim, you may do that. However, if it takes longer to roll it than that, you're not allowed to append those psukim. Why? Take a look at Rashi. At the end of Rashi, Dibur Masko Shel Yisuk HaTorgamad, Zemishum Shein Kavod Tzibur Lamod Sham B'Shtika, because it is an affront to the dignity of the congregation to just stand there twiddling their thumbs in silence while you are rolling the Torah. So many times,
The ultimate challenge is the Haftorah of Shabbos Shuvah. It's Hosea, Yoel, and Micha.
You have
And
like
if you're,
separate,
if you're doing it out
Haftorahs.
of a cloth, you have to roll very quickly to go from one to the other.
Yeah, exactly. That's an excellent point, Henry. So what we try to do sometimes, by the way, is sometimes I'll come into. It's happened before. Yeah, more rarely at the 8 a.m., but I've had this at the 7 a.m. I've walked in to give the sermon, and they realize that the Mafter Torah, let's say, wasn't rolled beforehand. So then I'll actually give the sermon while they're rolling the Torah. So that way we don't expend more time in the process. All right, that's the end of the Gemara for tonight. I want to raise a interesting halakhic question that comes up from Rav Zilberstein. Rav Zilberstein asks, there's a guy, the title is Ha'im levater al tefillah b'tzibur k'dei lo lahasid tosefes b'maskora. So here's the case. There's a guy who, he's a worker, and basically he davens a minyan every morning, very ehrlich guy, but his boss is now offering that anyone who comes in an hour earlier to work will get an extra bonus. You'll make a lot of money for coming in for that hour earlier. So he's trying to figure out, can I daven b'yechidus? Can I daven on my own in order so that I'm able to make this money? So if you take a look in the Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah says, so when is one allowed to skip davening with a minyan? This is referring to men who are working, because women do not have an obligation to daven with a minyan, though of course they're more than welcome to. So when is a man allowed to skip minyan? If by davening with a minyan, he's going to lose his salary. If he needs to get to some appointments in the city by 8 a.m. in the morning, and even davening at 6:30, he doesn't think he'll make it, so he's allowed to skip minyan that day and daven b'yechidus. However, there's a difference between losing money, having something deducted from your salary, versus menias harevach, which is I have the opportunity to make additional money. I have the opportunity to close the deal. which is not that I'm not losing money. I just lost the opportunity to gain money that I don't currently own. To that, the Mishnah Berurah says that one actually should prioritize minyan over losing potential money as opposed to losing money that he's currently supposed to make. However, Rav Zilberstein points out, however, if someone is kind of mocking and he comes in early every day, and just like one day it's not going to work with minyan, that might not be considered a case of losing something that you might a potential money. That might be considered losing actual money. So if you let's say you need to come in early every single morning in order to get that bonus, and then one day coming in early conflicts with minyan times, it's Rosh Chodesh, whatever it is. So then you are actually owed that money, and you could come in, you could miss minyan that day, because at that point, since that's money that's owed to you, as long as you can make that final day, so that's considered a real hefsid, a real loss. So okay, that's an interesting case that comes up, but we're talking about the significance of minyan. It's an idea that sometimes I know I'm preaching to the choir. We have a lot of people who come to minyan here, but it's interesting. It's kind of like something that's lost sometimes. I've talked with other rabbis who are, of the modern Orthodox ilk, and we were debating whether minyan is a chiyuv or not. Moshe Feinstein writes explicitly it's a chiyuv midrabanan. So I don't know, there's a lot of things that are chiyuv midrabanan that we keep. So it seems to be there's minority shita that you don't need, that minyan is a reshus. However, it seems the majority of poskim seem to think it's a chiyuv. So it's a tzarich iyan. It's a tzarich iyan. Sometimes I never understand how 8:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning, how there aren't more men over there. You can only have excuses for so long. Anyway, I'm preaching to the choir. I should stop. Okay, guys. Wishing you a wonderful evening, a good Shabbos to all, and God willing, see you soon.
Great, thank you,
Thank you,
Scott.
Rick.
Good job.
Thank you,
All right,
Scott.
take care. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.